After a few minutes of deep contemplation, Ram asked, "Holy sage, it is indeed incredible that this non-existent nescience creates such an illusion that this non-existent world appears to be very real. Pray explain to me further how this is possible. Also, please tell me why the king Lavana underwent all sorts of sufferings. Please tell me who or what it is that experiences all these sufferings." Vasistha replied, "O Ram, it is not really true that consciousness is in any way related to this body. The body has only been fancied by the consciousness as if in a dream. When consciousness, clothed as it were by its own energy, limits itself and considers itself a jiva, that jiva, endowed with this restless energy, is involved in this world appearance." So we've been concerned, or Ram's been concerned with how the notion of an external world arises. That's the what's referred to as the world appearance. And we've heard before how consciousness within itself, how infinite consciousness within itself has its own finite limitation. And that's what that limitation arises from thinking. And that thinking comes about from when we try to apprehend what's going on, when we try to conceptualize things, think in terms of objects and relationships and ideas. And that's the cognitive process, is what I refer to as the cognitive process. And when that happens, then a sense of individuality, the individual psyche, or here is referred to as the jiva arises, the notion of a jiva arises, and the notion of an external world. And this restless energy refers not only to that cognitive process, but also to the attention which gets diverted and hooked into elements which arise from the result of that cognitive process. So that's the jiva endowed with this restless energy. We could say then that the jiva is actually the sum process of the cognitive process, is the sum result of the cognitive process along with the restless attention. The embodied being who enjoys or suffers the fruits of past actions and who dons a variety of bodies is known as egotism, mind, and also jiva. So here we're bringing in the Hindu belief in reincarnation. It's trying to accommodate this belief in reincarnation. Although the embodied being here is not an immortal soul which somehow gets born over and over again. It's an ongoing process. The jiva is not an immortal, unchanging soul. Although if it were, it would never get enlightened. The standard belief seems to be a bit contradictory there, that somehow the jiva is immortal and it just takes on all these bodies life after life until it gets perfected and escapes from the process. But it must be changing. If it's not changing, then it's never going to get enlightened. And if it's changing, to what extent can it be said to be the same from one life to the next? I mean, even the physical body apparently is completely different every 7 years. There's no material in common. There's no physical material in common. All the cells have replenished, and there's nothing in your body that was here more than 7 years ago. So how much more can the subtle body of the jiva change? But as I say, it's an ongoing process, and it can be understood in terms of the cognitive process along with the hyperactive attention. Neither the body nor the enlightened being undergoes suffering. It is only the ignorant mind that suffers. It is only in a state of ignorance, like sleep, that the mind dreams of the world appearance, not when it is awake or enlightened. Hence the embodied being that undergoes suffering here is variously known as the mind, ignorance, jiva, and mental conditioning, as also the individualized consciousness. So we're getting caught up now in this idea of suffering. Neither the body nor the enlightened being undergoes suffering, and the end of suffering is the reason for the existence of the great Indian traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism. It's all to do with the end of suffering. And what exactly is meant by suffering? Well, I mean, we've got there the image of the Buddha sitting in tranquil meditation, somehow transcendent over suffering. But in the earliest Buddhist scriptures, it's well documented that he suffered pain. The Buddha experienced pain. So I'm not sure that suffering actually means pain here. I mean, the Buddha was a great ascetic, famous in his day for his austerities, living on 1 grain of rice a day, and he excelled in that tradition where the mind overcomes the body, and yet he saw it of no spiritual value, and after that he became enlightened, which we could understand as the supreme awareness. But he seems to have experienced physical pain, especially towards the end of his life, where he seems to have eaten some bad food, and he experienced back pain, and his personal attendant used to massage him, and when he experienced his food poisoning, he was very weak. And also there was an assassination attempt in his life by the renegade monk Devadatta, and Devadatta inflicted a painful wound on the Buddha. So the Buddha, the great enlightened one, was not outside physical pain. But it says here that it is the ignorant mind that suffers, and it's certainly worth exploring our relationship with pain. You know, when you're ill and your body's debilitated, the mind's reaction to this is worth exploring. I mean, pain is one thing, but the mind's reaction to it is another. And if you really want to know where you're at, then a period of illness is certainly a good way of letting you know. The suffering, I think, is actually dependent on how you relate to physical sensations of pain.